Good morning, everyone. And now, to be honest, this is one of the most interesting topics for me. I mean, feeding the world is essential, as we all know, but behind it lies an immense environmental cost. Our food system, and this is something I learned just a few years ago, that it contributes to almost 1/3 of the global greenhouse gas emissions. And the question becomes, how can we meet the needs of a growing population while also cutting on these emissions? And that's why today we are having this conversation with a panel of experts to explore bold solutions from sustainable agriculture to innovative technologies that are hopefully paving the way for a more sustainable future. And I would like now to invite on stage our speakers, Engineer Hassan Halawy. He's the Managing Director of Elite Agro Projects. Mr. Edward Hamod, and he's the founder and CEO of Switch Foods. Dr. Dimitra Theodoropulos, she's Director of Sustainability at Talabat. And Jamie, Burrows, founder and CEO of Thank you very much. And probably this is one of the most interesting conversations. I always thought that pollution mainly comes from cars, factories, planes, but I never thought 10 years ago that it also comes from our food system. And then I learned it was 30%, so this is a big portion. First questions that could come to anyone's mind: is it controllable? Let me start with you.
Yes, I mean, yeah, I think what you just said is a proof of a little bit the level of awareness among the general population that are not involved in the food system, of how broken our current food systems are, and their negative effect on not only on the environment in terms of emissions, but also on health, climate change, human behavior, all of that. So, and we see that more and more in this region versus more mature markets such as, the UK, the US, or Europe, where government entities, universities, schools have played a big role in the past, 10, 15, 20 years in educating their population about the importance of their food choices and how it affects their health and the global environment. When we look at emissions, you're absolutely correct. Today, around 34% of global emissions comes from the food system. The food system is basically the second largest emitter globally after the energy sector. And when you think of that, it's a bit crazy. Something that was supposed to be so natural and so biodiverse is actually a big emitter. Not to talk about waste as well. So today the energy sector has, looked at this problem directly and decided to invest billions of dollars in renewable energy over the past few years, while we haven't reached that in the food system yet. It's still under the radar. People don't talk about it enough. People are not aware about it enough. Every time we talk about emissions, about climate change, it's the energy sector that's highlighted, but actually food is very close to it. And I think that over the next few years, with the investment that's being done in the energy sector on the renewable and green, the food sector will become the largest emitter globally. Is it fixable? Yes, definitely. It just needs the regulator and the producer and the consumer to come along. So it starts from policy making, regulation, from producing the right food with the right ingredients, and for consumers demanding the right foods and focusing more on what they're eating in terms of sustainability and health.
And that's probably what you are trying to do as well, providing an alternative food, which we will come to it. But let me move to Hassan. And so awareness is a key thing for the public. But are governments aware of this big issue that needs to be solved?
Governments are aware, but I'd like to add a bit of history of this. How did we get here? Edward tackled the issue, but I think also we need to go back to the history of how did we come here. Post-World War II, agricultural revolution, the availability of hydrocarbons has unleashed and also the globalization that came after World War II started the trend of the agriculture that we see today, which is monocropping, growing crops, staples in certain areas, and by that creating a new economy that's based on consumer market, changing many of the traditional agricultural companies to be from producers into consumers, purely consumers. To do that, they had to, for them, it was a mission. There's nothing wrong. It was a mission to produce food cheap, and to meet the growing demand of a growing population. But the cost that they didn't know is what we're seeing today. So today, the cost of food that we have has an unhidden cost to it that is equal to 10 times what we're paying. So the cost of monocropping of wheat, soybean, all these commodities that are being grown in bulk are coming with a huge environmental bill. The greenhouse emission is a way to measure it. But if you look at it, we're destroying the rainforest. We're destroying a lot of the arable land that is there from overproduction, monotonous overproduction, pumping in chemicals so that we can produce. We're genetically modifying seeds to meet this requirement. But at the same time, we're destroying local production in many areas. We're both from Syria, so we used to be able to produce enough wheat, to have enough sort of sustainability or enough efficiency, same in any area around the world. Today, they don't grow wheat because it's much cheaper to bring it from Ukraine or Brazil, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot compete with that. But the cost, the hidden cost of the wheat that we're producing or the food that we're importing cheaply is very high. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect that happened is the demand on protein, and because we have cheap food, we were able to grow more cattle, to grow more red meat, and produce it more and make it abundant and cheap. So today, almost 30 to 40% of the food that we produce goes into producing proteins, which is the red meat, or also in the dairy as well, and also the chicken, with a very high conversion rate. So it takes you maybe 7 or 10 kgs of grains to produce 1 kg of meat, plus 15,000 liters of water. So, and a lot of energy consumed, which is why the dairy and the cattle industry is responsible for a higher amount of the greenhouse emission. So this system, again, needs to be addressed. I think there are some awareness. There is awareness now being floated. People are aware of this. It's not being tackled. It's done more on it's being more addressed through awareness of the end user, awareness of the consumer, who is now preferring to go to alternatives. It's being also made easier by people like Edward, who are giving an alternative to something that you can eat other than the actual meat. This is a delicacy that should stay. However, we're saying the cost of it is much higher than what we're actually paying. And if we want to address this and rebalance this, we need to look into the entire system to make it more sustainable for the future.
Amazing, thank you very much. And I will touch more on this as well. Dimitra, I'll get back to you, but let me first go with the Jamie. And it starts from the farming to some extent. What solutions are there today?
I think, first of all, I mean, there are many solutions. Just to kind of give everybody an overview, I represent Vertical Future. I'm founder and CEO. And a very basic definition of vertical farming, for those who are unaware, is the movement of the growing of crops indoors, obviously using artificial LED lighting, growing in layers, and basically controlling all the variables and eliminating the variability that otherwise crops would be subjected to outside. Far more water efficient. The energy efficient point is obviously something that we'll be discussing. Our company, we build the technologies, and then we obviously deploy the farms. The issue, I think, with our industry in particular, is that we're not addressing, and following on from previous comments, the protein problem. For example, vertical farming systems traditionally focus on a very, very small percentage of what we consume. We're not quite at the point where we have the unit economics that can address the 6 core crops that are effectively providing 75% of energy for the global population. But we do need to actually start implementing these at scale, irrespective. One example recently is from Iraq. By 2040, they're going to be completely out of water, and that's feeding 99% of the population.
Wow.
And that's a scary, scary fact. So implementation needs to happen, even if it's not quite there. So for me, food and water security has to be at price parity. We have to not think about just the top 1% or 5% of the population. We need to be thinking about everyone. And governments, the private, I think needs to be a private sector led initiative across all markets. But for this region, vertical farming it has to be implemented, because this region, you have the most acute issues, and they're only going to get worse with respect to climate change. In other regions around the world, the US and other places, they're using vertical farming for different purposes, whereas here it's definitely a necessity.
Just on this point, when you say it should be led by the private sector, can vertical farming compete with the traditional farming in terms of bottom lines for the companies?
Yes, so we've carried out some life cycle assessments. It will be crop specific, so not every crop will be able to compete. But if you look at the fact that a vertical farm is effectively a 30 to 50 year asset, and you look at it over that lifetime, you look at things like food miles, which is actually a very small contributor to emissions relative to things like energy consumption over that period, you can still unbelievably compete. I think 3 or 4 years ago, people didn't think that was possible, but there are studies, peer-reviewed studies from top academic institutions where it has been shown that yes, despite the fact that we're effectively replacing the sun and moving production indoors, we can compete. And you have to think about the fact that if we're being more productive in that space, we are freeing up the otherwise space that we use for farming for biodiversity. So in our farms, for example, we don't just do food, we do forestry as well. And we'll do the effectively the nursery crops, and we find that because of the way that we've grown them and the light spectra that we've used and the growing algorithms, they have a much higher survivability rate once they're planted outside. And that, obviously, we need more trees in every region. as well. But I think the energy, going back to your point, the energy question and the viability versus traditional farming is getting there. But I'm not going to stand here or sit here and say that this is a solution that's going to replace everything. It will always be a mixed bag of high-tech glass houses, working with vertical farms, working with traditional forms of agriculture, and will be very geography dependent.
So yeah, with the different alternatives that we do have. Dimitra, this is the first time I think about it in this way. So usually I go home now after work, and then I order my lunch from Talabat, and usually it should be a big portion of meat. But now I'm thinking of it from a different perspective, that this could either have came from Australia or India, the lamb to reach here, there's the transportation, there's the greenhouse emissions, and then the process of transportation as well in the country to reach the restaurant, to reach my home. It's a long process. So you being a director of sustainability at Talabat, what is the main vision here?
So it's working, right? Yeah. Thanks for having me here. So, I mean, look, I think from an emission standpoint, when we do a GHG accounting, we don't count the food, because our core business is tech and to a certain degree logistics, right? So when you look at it from an emission standpoint, in which we are working on towards sort of contributing to the UN SDG of climate action, our 3 layers are around, sort of first are our delivery emissions, which are around 40% of our emissions, then our packaging, which is 20%, and then comes in something that I think some of you may realize or not, but we are also our own online retailers, and this is where we have the biggest influence. So when it comes to the topic of food emissions, actually it falls more into our other work stream, which is about contributing to zero hunger and doing what we can around food waste. We know that one contributes to the other, but I just wanted to clarify that as a company, our emissions are made up of those 3 categories. So if you look into our online retailer, which we call T-Mart, which I hope some of you have tried, we do a lot around working with SMEs, which kind of removes that coming from a broad sense, but we also work on different LCAs, because it doesn't necessarily mean that someone is local, that they're actually more environmentally friendly, right? So we look into that and we try and work with different retailers, and in addition, we look at what we can control, which is like shrinkage. So we have actually buyback programs where we return in an earlier state products, where then the manufacturer can then either obviously resell them in different platforms, or then at least recycle it back into their value chain. We also try and use our tech, what we call tech for good, but try to influence, our biggest contribution in this topic is influence customer choice. So we have a section around, nearly expired products, but we also have piloted different things around using AI, right? So we have piloted for a mechanism in which, let's say you want to make, pasta bolognese, and you can actually input pasta bolognese and it tells you the ingredients that you need, and therefore you only order for what you need. And these are the kind of things that we're working on and focusing on, really influencing what we can. And we do realize that we have millions of users on our app, that we can actually bring awareness much faster, I think, than other channels, and actually guide them towards, the better decision. And not many of them, may know holistically what that is, but, for example, I was quite surprised, and we were talking about it earlier, in Qatar, we have a Made in Qatar section. And that actually has gotten a lot of traction from our local customer base because of many reasons, but also we try and work with local producers there. And we've seen that because of this visibility, they're actually growing and the demand is growing. So it's actually then costing them less, and therefore it's actually one of our more sort of growing businesses. So this is the kind of things that we're trying to do to influence sort of this ecosystem.
So today, if you take a flight and then you search flights on Google or Skyscanner, they will tell you, okay, if you take this flight, you will contribute by reducing 30% of CO2 or greenhouse emissions. Could we see this on your platform when we order food? Is it something that may change the way we behave as a human? Like,
I mean, it's something that we're discussing. However, as someone who is leading sustainability in a genuine way, I think, often enough these numbers are averages and are done in a way where the reality is not there. And while I'm actually leading this topic, I don't want to do it in an genuine way. So we're still a bit far away from really giving customers sort of that number per se, because usually those numbers don't count everything either, right? And so we will get there, but until we get there, I think our operation and our sense of this technology-driven mindset that we have is what we can do right now. And I think in that way, and maybe this is just to understand other ways other than our tech, the whole purpose of T-Mart is actually built around also reducing this, because what happens is we have satellite dark stores all across Dubai. I think we have around 30 plus, and those are actually serving communities, right? And so therefore, you can argue that these kind of setups, in addition to our dark kitchens, which now we house, 10 plus brands in the same kitchen, is where these efficiencies are met, right? In terms of the resources that they use and how they try and service our customers.
Awesome. Edward, last week I went to do a blood test and I found that my cholesterol levels are hitting the roof. It's double the average. I eat meat almost every day. And if you were to convince people like me about why use the alternative, how do you do it?
So thank you for bringing this up, because I had the same issue, and I still do. I'm not saying that I'm completely, but I think that today, if you look at to go back to what Hassan mentioned, or to build up about what he talked about, the history, right? Mature markets have studied meat consumption over the years. And there was a study in the US that shows that meat consumption per capita has tripled over the past 50 years. Okay? So an average American in the 70s used to consume 30 kilograms of meat per capita. Today they're 95. Now, if we look at what are the reasons behind these, it's governments and private companies who have pushed on this protein. Obviously, meat lobbies across the world are very, very strong. If you look at them, we can't forget that the conventional meat is a $1.4 trillion industry. So there's a lot of people that make a lot of money from traditional meat growing, harvesting, and selling, right? So obviously it comes with lobbying, farmers' lobbies. We see that in Europe. Europe is trying to make changes on alternative proteins, but they have farmers, they have unions, they have people, they have obstacles basically. But what we're saying is, if you look at also FAO as an organization, the Food and Agriculture Organizations, who has classified red meat as carcinogenic, right? It increases your possibility of developing cancer by about 25%, especially colon and stomach and intestine cancer, right? FAO has recommended human consumption to be around 20 to 22 kilograms of red meat per capita per year. In this region, we consume about 75 kilograms per capita.
More than triple.
More than triple. So, and then in this region as well, we have twice the obesity rate, the global average obesity rate. We have some of the highest cases of diabetes, especially type B in this region. It's a known issue. Cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death. And you have a lot of other blood non-communicative diseases. Now, it doesn't need a genius to analyze why we have all these health issues. I mean, yes, I understand that lifestyle doesn't help. We all know we need to exercise more and all of that. Yes, this is absolutely a necessity, but it's what we eat, right? It's what it's intake, the food intake that we consume that affects our human life, right?
Yeah.
So, and today, like you said, cholesterol. So I was like you. I used to consume meat on a regular basis, at least 5 or 6 times a week, and I always had a high cholesterol, high triglyceride issues, and I always ignored it. It was pure ignorance. It was, yeah. I mean, I liked meat. I enjoyed it. I was younger. I was fitter, and I thought, okay, I can get away with it. And it wasn't through my personal problem. So it was an unfortunate health-related issue that we had in the family.
Genetics.
No, not genetics. That was associated with a certain intolerance to a certain protein found in chicken that made me actually look at the impact of what I was doing. I've been in the food business since 2005, but I looked at it always as a P&L. I was looking at top line, bottom line, growth, all of that. But I realized that the impact of what I did was huge on human life. So today what we try to do, at least as Switch, and at least what we advise people to do, is we're not pitching vegetarianism or veganism. I'm not vegetarian or vegan myself.
Mm-hmm.
Now my daughter is, because the new generation is even more aware of the effect of the current food systems on the environment, on animal welfare and ethics. So they hate the way we factory farm animals.
Yeah.
But these are different issues. If we stick to the health, today we know that, red meat is, as I said, has been classified as carcinogenic. It contains a high amount of fats. Also, the red meat that we consume is not the red meat we consumed 30 years ago, right? It's not animals grazing in the prairies and eating grass, and it's factory farmed, it's factory fed, so you find a lot of hormones and antibiotics that are all being transferred into human bodies. It's obviously a source of cholesterol, and so what we try to do is to work with the right organizations, whether it's government authorities, NGOs, to provide the right awareness to people, but that's not enough. You have to give them a solution, right? You have to give them a tool to help them decrease their meat intake. Not stop it completely, but decrease it. Instead of eating meat every day, let's start by trying to eat it 4 times a week, and then 2 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
But when you crave that burger, when you have a pasta bolognese, right? You don't even taste the meat. You're actually using minced meat, which is the worst kind of meat because it's the remaining part of meat, and you put it for the texture, for the protein, right? So if you use an alternative that will allow you to get the same texture, the same taste, why do you need to do a bolognese with conventional meat? Fine, if you want to go out, eat a nice piece of steak with a specific marbling, Angus beef, Wagyu, yeah, you can enjoy that, but you don't do that every day,
Yeah, sure.
right? You consume an alternative to minced meat, right? So what we try to do is to provide these people a solution, because a lot of what I hear now that I'm in the space is, oh my God, Ed, I was vegan for 3 years, but then I couldn't stand the food anymore, so I started eating meat again. I was vegetarian for a couple of years, but we didn't have enough choices. What we try to do is to give you a product that is very similar to what you consume on a daily basis in a healthier version, right? Let's put down sustainability on the side a little bit, especially in this region where people are not really concerned about sustainability and climate change as in more developed countries. But people here have high disposable income, high buying power. Wellness and longevity is becoming more and more important to their lifestyle. So they're looking to improve their health, mainly. So if you can provide them this solution that is, free from hormones and antibiotics, a third of the fat content in terms of, and it's also in the form of plant fat, not animal fat, zero cholesterol, all natural ingredients, and that also tastes good, then you are giving him a tool to be able to reduce this meat intake.
I think the taste good part is the most important one, so I can be convinced, and we'll try it. I promise.
We have our food truck right outside.
I
You
will
can
try
have
it
lunch
now.
there on my account.
Thank you. I'll try it now. So Hassan, we just spoke now about innovation, innovative solutions and the meat industry. What about in the farming? Can you tell us about the different ones? I spoke with Jamie about the vertical farming. What are the different types of farming that are available, especially here in our region?
Yeah, sure. I would like to first touch on 2 points.
Sure.
First of all is how Edward made me change into, I was like you, so I think we all have the same problem, and I always told him, yeah, I'm always ordering Switch. So last time he wasn't very convinced, so he took me by the hand, a very nice food truck outside, and he made me try them all. And I'm hooked since. So I think I was always a bit skeptical about the idea. I like meat. I mean, I'm not convinced. But yeah, he made a good sales pitch. I think the food truck over there will speak for itself. But enough advertisement for Mr. Edward.
Yes, exactly.
I'd like to also, you said made in Qatar, and I would really love to have grown in the UAE section in Talabat. I think that would be an astounding and very nice initiative, and you will find a lot of support for it.
Hassan, just give the mic.
Yeah, you will find a lot of support for it from the Ministry of Economy and also for the food cluster that's been recently made. So if we can talk about that, I think that would be a great idea for all the local producers here.
So just to, it was an example, but just to say that we do have a section on made in UAE, but it's not always
grown in the UAE.
I mean, sure. I mean, you can think about the value chain in different ways because we have many different products. So we also want to be, advertising this with a certain certainty that we're, that it's not just a half-half kind of offering. I think the biggest challenge that we have is that is sort of demand, right? Because we may have, you could say like, of course there's the cucumbers, for example, that are quite popular nowadays, sort of, made in the UAE, but those sell out in no time, right? And so you have to rely on another sort of other products that are coming from, different
No, that was
places,
just a thought because of recent engagement in the aspect. Going back to technologies in agriculture, so at Elite Agro Projects, we're a full vertical. That's our core business. We develop agricultural projects from greenfield all the way to through the supply chain till you get it packed, ready to go to the shelf. And that's what we do. We experiment. We understand what we cater solutions that are that addresses the needs of the produce that we're trying to produce to the investor who is investing the money to know what is his end product and what's his bottom line figures, because that's also very important. And we have the local knowledge here to understand the challenges of agriculture in the region. Needless to say, agriculture as an industry is a very difficult industry. So when you come and put it in a very difficult environment that we have here, the heat stress, the water scarcity, the very poor soil, it adds in different levels of challenges. So what we've done is we really try to add in local knowledge, investigate and see what are the problems that we're trying to address and how do we address them. We came up with different solutions that are acclimatized for the region. And I would never say there's just one solution that's good. So it depends on what we're trying to achieve, what are the products that we're trying to grow, in which area, and what are the resources available in that particular farm or that particular investor. So we can come up with an ideal mix to come up with a sustainable solution. We've come in 4 years ago and we introduced a retractable roof net houses, for example. It was the first time we used them in the UAE as an alternative to the traditional pad and fan system. I'm not saying the pad and fan is not good, but I'm saying in certain crops, in areas with very high relative humidity, they don't work. And you're using 90% of the water and electricity in these greenhouses to evaporate for evaporative cooling, which is not working. So we changed that into technologies that it's a very medium or basic technology, but there's a lot of investment that's done in the cooling and the roofing so that it reflects a lot of the harmful UV so that we can grow with much less water. We introduced the hydroponic system. We're using now a lot of precision irrigation to maximize the use of the water, minimize the electric consumption. So that's one aspect of it. I go back to Jamie and his and the discussion about vertical farming. Unfortunately, vertical farming in the past experiences that we've seen here in the UAE, talking just here in the UAE, hasn't been successful. Many reasons. The limitations in the crops that we're able till today to produce in the vertical farm, so we're very limited in the array. We're a very small market in the UAE, so when you have 3-4 players producing the same produce, sending it, again, catering for a very niche clientele, the bottom lines are not good, do not justify the investment. However, like you mentioned, we can use this into growing seedlings, for example, so that we can give all the farmers a healthy seedling so they can grow their tomatoes and cucumbers. That's one way for it. We can use it for the reforestation to grow more heat-tolerant, more salt-tolerant varieties that we can transplant outside and use them in a healthy way, that are healthy to go out. There's a lot of talk now. Of course, everybody's talking about regenerative agriculture, which is very good, and this is basically what we used to do 100 years ago. It's not a science, but this is exactly what you used to do 100 years ago, and now we're coming back to reintroduce it because of the monocropping culture that we have. Unfortunately, here in this part of the world, it's still very critical. We need to do a lot of R&D into it so that it caters to the requirement. Our soil is sandy, so it does not hold a lot of nutrients, and we have 6 months where it's barren and does not have a cover to protect it. So that's an area where we really need to invest into more R&D to, it's not a zero-sum game, so we don't need to go all the way as per the book, but we need to adjust it to the region to understand how we can work on it. There is a demand also with the increase, and I wrote about this a few days ago, with the increase in, with the climate change that's happening and the increase in temperature, we're seeing a lot of commodities, the production of commodities like coffee, cocoa, is really declining. If you look at the prices of cocoa, and I posted about this, if you see the performance of cocoa in the last 5 years compared to NVIDIA, invest in cocoa. Despite all the hassle about NVIDIA, it's performing better. But why? Because farmers are not able to produce. Yeah. There's a big shortage in it. Now, with controlled environment agriculture in areas like, for example, you take the UAE, for example, where we have a very efficient and very competitive power, we can start growing them here. There's still a lot of work to be done. There's a very big, high investment that needs to be done in the CapEx, but if we are able to do enough R&D into bringing down the CapEx, increasing the productivity, this might be the future of it. I'm not saying this, but this is
maybe the competitive advantage of the UAE, especially when it comes to power, for sure. Dr. Dimitra, let me go to your point that you touched on. So you said when it comes to Talabat, you do have the packaging, delivery, and at the end, waste management. This is where the cycle ends, probably. Where do you see the most challenges coming from? Because you have the emissions that you need to control. You have the clients to satisfy and the end customer as well. Where do you see the main challenges over here?
You mean in reducing our emissions?
Yes.
I would say packaging. I think packaging is the biggest challenge. I think delivery emissions, we've already launched electric vehicles in our fleet and are doing so and scaling and working with the government on the energy infrastructure. The other side of it, there's many ways we're influencing in terms of the products that we're selling and how we're working with local producers, et cetera. But the packaging to me is, the base of our business is to deliver food, and it has to come into some sort of shell, right? And unfortunately, in terms of innovations that sustain this kind of delivery, there aren't that many options that are also cost effective, right? I think the other challenge in packaging is the fact that a lot of our brands, because you're, as a customer, you're expecting a certain branded packaging, it also gives a certain certainty that it's come from there, right? Like imagine where you usually order from, I'm not sure, but if you don't have that branding or that, set of packaging that kind of goes hand in hand with the brand, I don't know how likely are people to actually consume it, right? So, and again, looking at different LCAs, it's not quite clear that one material is better than the other. We've actually in the past launched, and it actually it failed, compostable packaging. Even the best of it is not able to contain most of the sort of type of food that goes into delivery, and able to sustain, like, especially during the summer, the kind of heat to make sure that when it comes to your door, it still tastes good, right? So there's a lot to be done in this space, and it is the biggest one we struggle with because of these external factors, but because also we have less of an influence on it.
Do you have any targets in your department that you want to reach in terms of reducing emissions?
Yes, so for the UAE, we've already pledged 30% of our deliveries will be done by EVs by 2030. So 30% of our vehicles will be EVs as a minimum. And in addition, as part of being, part of a bigger group called Delivery Hero, we also have science-based targets that are guiding the other sort of emission categories.
Awesome, thank you. Jamie, so Hassan just touched a little bit on vertical farming in the region. Some stuff works, some other stuff does not work. And, this panel is all about the climate change. So my question to you is, do you see vertical farming, if we continue to develop it and work on studies, do you see it as a scalable solution for mass food production?
Yes, it has to be scalable. I am very against, I wouldn't say against, but a lot of these kind of inner city models, shipping containers, they're very good in terms of, educating and, talking to children about, the importance of food and healthy eating and so on. But the ideal setup, if I don't know, I had to plan it 30 years forward, would be large vertical farms, ideally integrated with glass houses and other forms of agriculture in peri-urban or rural areas next to key logistical routes. But as mentioned, there will always be a limitation on the types of crops that can be grown. And to an earlier point, this is not cheap. We need different types of investors to step in. I think this is the right kind of region. I think we need to be brave and think about the futures of our children and what it's going to look like for them, especially with those 6 crops I mentioned earlier, as opposed to more of a short-termist view that I think a lot of investors are taking now. Looking at the kind of, there's always a natural attrition rate when you build an industry, right? Which is, and there's failures and learnings, and that's why, perhaps some of the farms here in the UAE have not been successful. Certainly in the US, as proven, there have been many mistakes. So yeah, I'm very much a believer in that, but as I say, I think it's a mixed solution and is not a silver bullet in any sense.
Do you think subsidies are required?
At the minute, yes. So I think if you're talking about some of it will depend on the crops, and it will also depend on the location of the farm. It will depend on the capital investment that's required. But I think that subsidies are required. I wouldn't say required, but something that the industry definitely wants and needs in particular areas.
Awesome. Thank you. our panelists for these valuable insights. I truly enjoyed this conversation. I mean, it's clear that tackling emissions in our food system requires collaboration, creativity, innovation, and of course, willingness to embrace these new technologies. So I hope if we sit on the same panel next year, we see lots of developers in this space. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.